Hunter Dickinson gets ejected, and Kansas still finds a way to knock off Duke. Did they make the right call?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Thanksgiving Eve. It's Wednesday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shea, joined by our good buddy, Leaf Tulane, with us 2 days in a row on the show here. Love that. You're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Reminder, you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Thanks so much for joining us today. Where no matter what time we're recording during Feast Week, there's always basketball going. We could do it late at night. They'd still be playing in Maui. We could do it right now. Indiana and Louisville are already tipping off the battle for Atlantis Leaf. It's a great time to be alive. This episode, friends, is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start with a big return on FanDuel. New customers place a $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $150 back in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Coming up on the show today, man, so much to unpack. We had 3 top 12 battles yesterday. UConn loses again in Maui. Players Era Festival got going for the first time ever. And as I just said, Battle for Atlantis tipping off today, literally right now. Louisville up 7-6 on Indiana. But Leaf, there is nowhere else we can start than number 1 Kansas beating number 11 Duke. Kansas winning 75-72 as Con Knippel's three-pointer at the buzzer misses. We cannot bury the lead. Here's where we got to start. Hunter Dickinson is ejected from this game with right around 10:30 to go. Let me set up the context, Leaf. Then I want to ask you if it was the right call or not. Kansas is up 57-55. Duke's on a 7-0 run. Hunter Dickinson puts up a shot, gets his own rebound up over Malik Brown, but it's kind of awkward. Brown undercuts him, and they tumble to the ground. And Leaf, I got to be honest, in real time, I was like, oh, there's, a foul on Malik Brown in the rebounding action. I didn't even notice the foot happen. And then there was this scrum. I didn't understand why there was the scrum. Duke players are upset. And I'm like, why are they so upset? And then we see the replay and we see Hunter Dickinson's foot come down on Malik Brown's head. So Leaf, my question to you, do you agree or disagree with the decision to upgrade this to a flagrant 2 and eject Hunter Dickinson from the game?
I honestly was kind of ambivalent about it. I thought it would be a flagrant 1 because of the fact that Malik Brown was the player to commit the personal foul. So I thought they'd kind of have some leniency and say, well, we'll call it a dead ball technical or a dead ball flagrant 1 and kind of basically act as a double foul because it wouldn't have happened if Hunter Dickinson wasn't taken down. But the fact that a foot connected with the head and there was at least time to avoid for it to happen, I'm not saying it was malicious. I feel kind of as if you were to kick someone in the head you meant it, it probably would have been harder than that. So I can go both ways. I had no problem with the call, but I expected it to be a flagrant 1 as opposed to a 2. And you know what's interesting about that? I think this was the type of game in which Kansas might have been better served not focusing solely on finding Dickinson because they're high-low action, which has been beautiful for years and years. And this year's got amazing capacity because KJ Adams is a spectacular athlete, but also a really good feeder of the ball into the sizable Dickinson. But Malach and Brown were able to impact those passing lanes. And then you had Cooper Flagg as the best free safety ever, and he knocked it away a couple times. So when he got ejected, I kind of thought, I wonder what happens here. And Flory Badunga deserves a lot of credit because he was sensational the rest of the way.
I think that could go easily underlooked, Leaf, in this whole story because the storyline is so much about the Dickinson and the flag of it all, and obviously Brown getting mixed up with this. But kudos to Badunga, who really hadn't been playing all that well coming into it, but really held his own at least enough down the stretch to allow the Jayhawks to hang on. Leaf, what was interesting to me, I actually went and watched back a little bit of the lead up to this play. On the Kansas offensive possession before that one, Dickinson and Malik Brown had gotten a little bit tied up there as well, like kind of behind the play. So you didn't really notice it in real time. At least I didn't last night. And I wonder, Dickinson, he can kind of carry these grudges and carry some of these things. And so it was kind of like building a little bit anyway, and then this moment happens. I kind of am with you on a lot of what you said there. Like, I didn't even have it in my mind that it might get upgraded to a flagrant 2. I was like, this is going to be a flagrant 1, but then there's the common foul still on Brown, and we move on. And so when they announced flagrant 2, I was frankly kind of shocked at that being the decision they made. But it is the decision they made, and Kansas, much to their credit, specifically Badunga, as you said, able to hold on and get the win. Now, Leaf, let's not let that mar what was a great basketball game, man. This was so fun to watch. Kansas gets off to this hot start, 16-3, a 14-0 run. As part of that, Cooper Flagg has a couple turnovers in the first couple minutes. But then Duke just methodically and systematically works their way back into this basketball game, having multiple good runs throughout it. And gets to where they're only down 2 at the half, went on an 8-0 run to get it back to 57-56. Leaf, what were your, outside of the ejection, what were your big takeaways from this game?
Well, Andy and I talked about how we thought KJ Adams is about as good of a antidote to Cooper Flagg, is the word I used yesterday.
That's a great word.
In terms of he's got the size, strength, length, athleticism combination that I felt like Cooper Flagg wasn't going to have a prolific outing. Could he still be awesome? And in some ways, yes, he was. It absolutely could happen, but I just felt like it was less likely. And I felt confident Kansas would be able to manufacture ways to score even against Duke's impressive defense and especially rim protection. There were times where Malach and Flagg, like even at the end of the game when Zeke Mayo made that little spin back and he didn't shoot the first one, he shot the second. I was like, oh no, shoot the first one here. And that's just a credit to the go bear factor, and people in Utah would call it, about Malach. No one wants to shoot it because he's nearby. So the reason I bring that up, though, is even though Dickinson, I don't think was particularly great, a lot of credit goes to Malik Brown. Malach was good. Flagg, like I mentioned on the backside. Kansas has enough players who have played enough basketball games, even if they're all not used to playing with each other. DeJuan Harris, KJ Adams certainly are. And then you look at Zeke Mayo, Rylan Griffin, who have played a lot of big games. Zeke Mayo obviously was the best player in his league. Rylan Griffin was in the Final Four. And I just felt like the depth of experience, and it's not like they're lacking for talent. Kansas was going to beat the top-end talent, but lack of experience for Duke this early. But my biggest takeaway from this game and just in general is that Duke and Kansas are top 5 teams. And yes. I've said this to you. I've said this to Andy. I think I said it in our season preview. I think there are 5 teams that are better than everyone else. In the season preview, I said there was 4. I thought it was Kansas, Alabama, Gonzaga, and Duke were the 4 best. That may be.
Can I guess who the 5th is that you've added?
I think you can get this correct.
It's got to be Auburn.
It's Auburn, exactly. I think Auburn's in there. And then I feel pretty confident the 6th and 7th best teams in the country reside in the Big 12, and they are defensively oriented and have both lost to Auburn. And
man,
list, Houston and Iowa State. So I feel pretty confident those are the 7 best teams in the country. The rankings may not reflect that week in, week out because Duke has 2 losses already in 5 games, but they're really, really good. Kansas just may be the best right now, but the potential for Duke's off the charts. I think Kansas had a lot of room to grow. Gonzaga's got a lot of room to grow. Auburn looks like the closest thing to a finished product to me right now, but they still have a lot of room to grow. And Bama's got a ton of room to grow, but they started to show it yesterday. So that was my big takeaway. I watched this game and I was like, well, that's a Final Four game right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like if we define it as looks the best right now versus room to grow, it is Auburn, Gonzaga, and Kansas for me would be a top 3 in terms of, like, again, as you separating where they will be versus where they are. Those 3 are the 3 most impressive right now to me. And yeah, as you said, there are multiple teams like Duke, Houston, North Carolina that each have 2 losses, but they're all to these other teams that we're talking about here. And so that's part of it. Leaf, one of the things that I think, like talking about where they will ultimately get to, I thought a great example we had with that with Duke specifically is Duke had some moments at the end of this game that were reminiscent of their other loss to Kentucky. We had the Flagg turnover when Duke was down 1 in the final minute. We had the Con Knipple turnover when he spun back into traffic and got met. It was KJ Adams and I think Badunga there to meet him. and flag never touched the ball on that possession. And so it was like those moments were like, that's going to happen early in the season with Duke. But I think the encouragement for John Shire and for Duke fans is that they learn and grow from that. And I don't think we will see those same kind of mistakes come February and March.
I'm totally with you. However, I would say if there's any criticism of both Flag and Kahn, who are their best two offensive players, is neither are innately gifted as individual creators. They're not like Ace Bailey where they start raining jump shots that are really, really difficult. So a lot of it is being a better athlete, but having these skills. So you'll see kind of pivot sequences, whether it's a spin, and it allows for the defense to dig in and try to get the ball. And so that's what happened. Otego away, stole it for Kentucky, and you saw a host of bodies in there for Kansas for both Cooper Flag spin to the middle when he spun left to right, and then Colin Knipple spun and got stuck in the air. And you can't really get stuck in the air when you got an athlete like KJ Adams who can slide his feet like he can, but also elevate to contest a shot. So I think the experience won it for Kansas, but I think Duke does need to find a way to create shots that aren't just like, hey, my best player is better than yours. And it is true. Flag's, in my opinion, the best player in the country. But it doesn't always work at the end of a game when you're not necessarily creating a great shot every single time, whereas he kind of relies on athleticism and length combination. So maybe it becomes Proctor and pick and roll. Maybe it changes, but I think they'll develop in late games. But right now, it is a weakness to monitor.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I was going to phrase it when you finished there, Leaf, is it's definitely something to keep an eye on because Duke does not have a DeJuan Harris to look on the other side of the court last night that can simply do that and prepare Duke to get into position for those moments, right? Like Foster, Proctor, somebody's going to have to step up and find a way to be able to do that and set these guys up. And if not, that is something to watch that could hurt Duke in the long run. But we will see what happens with that. Leaf, there is so much action we got to get to today. The inaugural Players Era Festival tipped off on Tuesday. And wouldn't you know, we got 2 overtime games out of it. We're going to talk about that and preview you today's Players Era NIL events as well. All coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book because right now new customers can bet $5, and if it wins, you get $150 in bonus bets back. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all right there in one place. Get ready. It's coming tomorrow on Thanksgiving. Maybe you get a hunch in the middle of the game. Well, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place those bets. Battle for Atlantis kicking off right now. How about the odds to win that event? Gonzaga is the heavy favorite at -130, then Arizona +280, Indiana +650, and then Louisville, 4th best odds at +1,000. Visit FanDuel.com to get in on that action today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Leaf, the inaugural Players Era Festival, the first big NIL MTE tipped off, I guess we should say, on Tuesday. The headliner of this event was 6th-ranked Houston against 9th-ranked Alabama. Crimson Tide wins it 85-80. We had 3 other games. Let me just give you those results really quick, Leaf, and then we'll get back to that headliner. Oregon knocks off Texas A&M, 20th-ranked Texas A&M, 80-70. It was closer than that. Oregon hits their free throws down the stretch. San Diego State beats number 21 Creighton 71-53. Leaf, I'm getting worried about the Blue Jays. And then Rutger, a very, very fun game late, beats Notre Dame 85-84 in overtime. 36 points for freshman Dylan Harper. That is insane. Leaf, let's go though to Houston and Alabama, where, man, we just had a back and forth game. Both teams taking leads, getting ultimately the win here for Alabama. Leaf, I think there would be some people who might say, man, I'm concerned about Houston, but they've lost to Auburn and Alabama. And I think that's more a product of the schedule than it is Houston not being a good basketball team.
I agree with you, but I do think the other 2 teams generate points more easily. And that's why I took Alabama yesterday. So
yes. Yes.
I think Alabama on a neutral site, like had that been Houston, I would have favored Houston. That's why I was shocked Auburn had beaten Houston because it was in the city of Houston. Whereas neutral site, I think the team that scores more easily and has a lot of teams score more easily than Houston, but they don't have the athletes that Alabama has to compete on the glass. I felt throughout that first half, Houston was up 2, that it was played at Houston's tempo, at Houston's physicality, and yet Alabama had every chance to take the lead. They were missing shots, they were missing free throws, turnovers, and that's all to happen against Houston. But the fact that they were down 2 and probably should have been up to my eye, I would have said indicated that they were going to win the game. So then they were up 6 or 7 points, and I felt like got complacent with about 7 minutes to 3 minutes left. And then all of a sudden, LJ Cryer got a bunch of looks, and I was like, well, they might have just blown the game. And I'll admit, I had a vested interest in Houston winning, or Bama winning last night. So I was very frustrated. I was like, oh my goodness, like it's obvious LJ Cryer is the only player who can hurt you right now. And I talked about that with Andy yesterday. For those of you who listen to the Everydayers, thank you guys. But I talked about the only player on Houston that I think can score on his own is LJ Cryer. The rest are kind of release valves. And so that's why I believed in Alabama. They had more people who can hit open shots, and they have more people than most teams that can handle the physicality of Houston. Granted, JoJo Tugler, Javier Francis, and Juwan Roberts are a beast. They are unbelievable. Rebound, block, everything. Great players. But at the end, it all became the truth of the matter was Mark Sears created offense by getting to the free throw line, and Alabama had a few other players that could hit shots. When the going got tough in the last 4 minutes and overtime, no one on Houston other than LJ Cryer had the ball, and no one had a prayer to score. So I will always say Houston is a monster. I think they might win the Big 12, even though they've lost to 2 teams already. And we've talked about how Kansas might be the best team in the country. I think both things can be true. But the difference is, at the end of a game, I trust Bill Self and Kansas to score, and you're not going to avoid close games in the way that UConn did because Houston's not that dominant. So I still hesitate to put them in my Final Four. I had them as my 5th team in the preseason, and I just don't think they quite have the horses that the other top teams do. That said, they're a top 7 team in the country.
Yeah, I mean, Houston, to your point, 2 points in overtime of this game, Leaf. Not that Bama set the world on fire. They had 7, but that's kind of where it was. Yeah, you talked about LJ Cryer. He finishes with 30 points, a perfect 10 of 10 from the free throw line, but needed 26 shots to get there. Man, it was just 9 of 26. And man, I really thought Mark Sears might be getting going now. And if that's the case, folks need to look out because Alabama is going to be rolling. 24 points for Sears, although he was pretty inefficient himself, 4 of 13 from the field. And frankly, neither team was all that efficient. Bama shoots 36.7% from the floor, and Houston slightly better at 36.9%. So this was by no means an offensive beauty contest, but it was a good win, obviously, for Alabama. As you said, I don't think Houston's going anywhere. It's just where we're at early in the season with this thing. Leaf, as you look at the other 3 games yesterday from the from Players Era Festival, we had, again, Oregon and San Diego State knocking off 2 ranked teams, although 2 teams that I don't think should be ranked for very long in A&M and Creighton right now. I think they should be kind of on the outside looking in. And then Rutgers holding off a Notre Dame team that's doing all right for themselves early in this season. What did you take away from any of those 3 other games?
I'm worried about Creighton, and Dylan Harper had quite a performance. But those are the 2. Creighton, I came in worried to the season, but I didn't realize how bad it was. And admittedly, they didn't have Stephen Ashworth. But that's right. Stephen Ashworth can't make up that big of a deficit by himself. Like, you need to have someone to supplement Kalkbrenner. And that said, you're not even involving Kalkbrenner in the last couple games after he had 49 in the first game. Seems unthinkable. I'm very worried about Creighton. As for Dylan Harper, I don't think Rutgers is a very good basketball team, but he and Ace Bailey have supreme talent.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think, we do get, and by we, I mean we, the country, we, the college basketball fans, get so excited about these, the big time names, but I don't think Rutgers as a team is going to have much to say in the Big Ten or on the national scale this year. So we'll watch that. Leaf, before we move on to Maui and some other stuff happening today, let me give you Wednesday's schedule for the Players Era Festival. Folks, as a reminder, this is they've changed the format around multiple times for this thing to get it figured out for year 1. it is not a win in advance, lose, and you go to the losers bracket. There's two kind of round robin situations, the second of which is today. And then the third games are going to be kind of those matchups will be made after that. So today, Texas A&M and Creighton face off at 6:30 Eastern. Unfortunately, it's only available on Max. A&M favored by 3.5. Alabama against Rutgers. That's 10 p.m. Eastern on TBS. No FanDuel line yet, but Ken Palm has Bama minus 11. Houston against Notre Dame. That's going to be at midnight 12:30 Eastern. So technically Thursday. Houston favored by 16.5 in that one. And then Oregon, San Diego State at 4 p.m. on TNT and Max. Ducks minus 3.5. Leaf, I think Oregon San Diego State is the game I might be most excited about of those four today, even though we've got a ranked on ranked matchup in another one of them.
Yeah, the thing about Oregon San Diego State is they play so differently. Oregon's going to throw you a bunch of random gimmicky zones. They're going to get hot from three, or they're going to be ice cold. Shellstad's going to do a lot, and then you're going to be like, who else is going to step up? San Diego State is always win or lose by committee. No one has too many shots right now, and you're going to be unbelievably physical and intense defensively. Like they're a watered down Houston to me. Like that's the way that San Diego State plays. They play very physically. They're athletic, and offensively they struggle to generate two great looks. So I think San Diego State's got the more replicable recipe. So maybe they should be favored. But Oregon, I like their team. I picked them as my Big Ten favorite, as a little bit of a sleeper before the year. So I want to ride with them. But that said, I thought Texas A&M was the better team against Oregon much of the game. And then at the very end, Oregon turned it on and won by 10.
Yeah. And while I'm not excited, like I think Bama has their way with Rutgers, I am very curious to see, we just talked about the freshmen. I am excited to see both Bailey and Harper and how they do and how they perform against an elite team of Alabama's pedigree. So that'll be a very interesting thing to watch as well. Leaf, obviously we got a crud ton of MTEs. Maui has been absolutely a wild ride so far. Never know what to expect on any given day, including UConn losing to Colorado. That makes zero sense, but it happened, and that's why we play the games, my man. We're going to talk about Maui and look ahead to today coming up in just a second. Maui Invitational 2024, Leaf, is this event we've been very excited about. 4 top 12 teams in it: UConn, Auburn, Iowa State, and North Carolina. But here's the wild thing, and we'll look ahead to Wednesday's schedule in a second. Because of the way these games have played out, none of those 4 ranked teams are playing each other today. It's the 4 ranked teams against the 4 unranked teams. And so kind of loses its luster a little bit in some of that regard. We'll get to that in a second. But Andy, good grief. We had 4 games yesterday, and probably the last one we'll talk about is Memphis and Michigan State, which is one of the semifinal games, because UConn loses again to Colorado. This one 73-72. This is the first time that UConn has lost back-to-back non-con games in the Dan Hurley era. We'll get to Auburn, North Carolina, that ranked on ranked game, and a Dayton team that has really impressed me out on the islands, Leaf. But let's start with UConn, man. What is going on?
I mean, I was stunned that they didn't win, but I thought they were going to win by 20.
Yeah.
Like, you lose, you play a team in Colorado that struggled to score against Michigan State, that sports a lineup of completely unproven players. And even when they were up 11 at the end of the first half, it was unconvincing. They were shooting really well, and they still were fouling, and in Colorado was missing free throws. Like, everything was going right for UConn to cover the spread, to win big, and it still felt like they weren't very good. Then the second half starts, and they come down to earth a little bit shooting-wise. Their defense stays just absolutely terrible, and Colorado starts playing a little better. And it's a little upset watch, and it just gets worse and worse. You still think they're going to pull it out, but at a certain point, Cinderella is coming. And Colorado, I don't think played that crazy. Like, it wasn't unsustainable either. That's the crazy thing. Like, usually when upsets happen, either the one team shoots absolutely horribly or one team shoots incredibly. I don't think what they did was not sustainable. And so UConn can't guard a chair right now, and Hurley's got to be losing his mind. They can't guard the perimeter. Samson Johnson will fall for every pump fake in a 20-mile radius, and so he's going to foul out. Terrace Reed's going to foul out. Mahaney can't guard and can't run the UConn's complicated system. He was on the bench the whole time. So really, you're living with solo ball threes, shoots the heck out of the ball. It's all good. Caravan threes, didn't shoot well yesterday, but usually shoots the heck out of the ball. And McNeely threes, shoots the heck out of the ball. But you have no individual creators. And if Diarra gets in foul trouble like he did, not yesterday, but the game before, then you have to play Mahaney against what will be quick guards like Memphis, which exposed them. So they've got a host of issues. I came into the year lower on UConn, but not in my wildest dreams did I see this.
Whew. Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. Right now, here's the dichotomy in UConn. They are 4th in the nation in offensive efficiency, Leaf, but 59th in defensive efficiency. And that is going to be a problem. There is no Stephon Castle. There is no Andre Jackson, right? Like these guys that have just been able to.
There's no Donovan Clingan.
There's no Clingan to erase it on the back end. That's a good point. Like, are you at the point now where you would, if you were Dan Hurley, would you bring Terrace Reed into that starting lineup for Samson Johnson?
Yes, because Samson Johnson is an energy guy. He's not necessarily a substance producer, and he's not able to match up body for body with some of the bigs he's playing. He's more of I'm in a hedge, and because I'm quick laterally, but he keeps picking up fouls there, and he can jump out of the gym. But like I said, you got to time your jumps, and you got to think about which times to go for it too. I would consider that, and I think Hassan Diarra is better than Mahaney. I talked to a friend. This was not on a podcast, but I think their second game of the season, they played Sacred Heart. Maybe it was their third game, but they played Sacred Heart. And I watched and I thought to myself, like, the offense runs better with Diarra. He may not be as innately gifted at scoring as Mahaney is, but the offense runs better. And defensively, when they play teams that can actually expose them, Diarra is a point of attack bulldog defender. They need those, but it can't just be him because Caravan's like a heady defender. Like so much was talked about as like, oh, if you can play UConn last year if you attack Caravan or Spencer. Well, both of those were like NBA level athletes, but they're just below NBA level. Now Caravan's their second best defender, and it's just not a good system. And McNeely's not a bad defender, but he's a freshman, and that maturity matters. So I'm quite out on UConn. I told you and Andy this off camera. I'll say this on air now, though. I think 3 of the 1 seeds from last year missed the Sweet 16. That was my bold prediction on my Twitter before the season started. I'm sorry to your Tar Heels, they're included.
That's okay. So we'll get to them in a second here.
The Tar Heels, it's UConn and Purdue. I don't think any of them make the Sweet 16.
Yeah. And speaking of Alex Caravan, has a rough day, goes 1 of 8 from the field, 1 of 7 from 3. That's not going to help. And so we'll see. And we'll talk Iowa State and Dayton here in a minute. But I'm telling you, Leaf, I've been very impressed by Dayton. And if they've got anything left in the tank, UConn could leave this event 0-3. And that is wild to think about. But before we get to that one, we had another top 12 matchup, and that was number 4 Auburn, number 12 North Carolina. Auburn wins 85-72 in a game that, quite frankly, was not as close as that score indicates. Janai Broome, far and away the best player on the court. His 3rd straight Leaf 2010 game, almost has a 2020 in this one, 19 rebounds, and to go with it, 5 assists and 3 blocks. North Carolina, all offseason, Leaf, our conversation was about their misses in the transfer portal, and it really comes to show in this one.
Yeah, I felt very confident. Of all the games yesterday, this was the game I felt like it was the most obvious to read. And that was a bold thing to say because no one thought UConn was going to lose yesterday, much less, or 2 days ago, much less yesterday. But this one made sense to me. North Carolina can't guard bigs. They have arguably the best big in the country. Auburn has sizable guards that may not slow down the trio of guards for North Carolina, or maybe may not stop them, but they can slow down because they have a lot of bodies that have the speed and a size combination that is impressive defensively. North Carolina also doesn't necessarily have the shooting to punish you from the forward spots where Auburn loads up and plays Dylan Cardwell on the interior. So I actually thought North Carolina did a good job on the glass, strangely enough. I thought Auburn was going to dominate the glass. They won narrowly. But if Auburn makes any threes in that game, which they did, and it was basically a split, I think North Carolina shot a slightly better percentage, or at least throughout much of the game until kind of desperation time. I thought that was their only chance. And then if Auburn makes threes, you're absolutely toast. And Auburn made a few threes. Janai Broome started off great. They led wire to wire. That was a dominant display, and from the best team in the country right now, I'd say.
Yeah. And to your point, yes, North Carolina shot like 1 percentage point better from three, but their attempts were much fewer. So I think it was like 11 made threes to 6 made threes. That plays out. And yeah, I mean, I think where Carolina has not found things is Cade Tyson, who we expected to help a lot with that 3-point shooting at the forward spot you're talking about, has been a complete no-show so far this season. And so that's a big issue for Hubert Davis's team, whose front court is really struggling, Leaf. And so similar to Houston, North Carolina has 2 losses, but it's to Kansas and Auburn, who we think are 2 of the 3 best teams in the nation right now. So I feel like we don't have a good yet understanding of what North Carolina actually is. The other big game was Iowa State and Dayton. Dayton had a lead for a while, looking like they might make the 7th place game be UConn and Iowa State, which would have been a thing of hilarity. But Iowa State, man, just so good, comes back, wins 89-84. Another very physical game. Leaf, I think the bigger learning this week for me is that Dayton could wind up going 0-3 in this event, and I would probably rank them next week because they are that impressive. And it's just they came up against 3 other highly ranked teams.
Yeah, I thought Dayton offensively looks a lot more innovative than they did last year. Last year, they were kind of boring. They'd feed it into
Holmes. Yep.
And they would always run the pick and roll, kind of stop, feed it into Holmes. Maybe you'd let someone leave off of Brea or Santos, and that was your source of 3-pointers. Well, this year they got a lot of different players that shoot threes, and they're playing very high pace. So good for Anthony Grant and the Flyers. I wouldn't be shocked if they beat UConn. I definitely won't bet on it, but I'm not going to bet on UConn, whether it's spread or game. They look bad and Flyers look good. But Iowa State, I didn't watch as much of this game as I did the others because I was watching the Jazz game and I had 3 screens up. I was at the Jazz game with Wembanyama doing alien things, hitting threes in everyone's faces. So I'd look up and then I'd be like, oh my God, there's Cooper Flagg. And then I'd look to my right and it was Houston, Bama. So admittedly, I watched the least of this one. But at the end of the game, Iowa State had an answer, and it was Keyshawn Gilbert. So I really like the way they play. And honestly, he was really good, and he could have won the game against Auburn. We could be talking about Iowa State in a championship game very easily. But I think they've got the right recipe. They got guards, they defend, and they just scored 89 points. Like we talk about teams that struggle to score. I think Houston struggles to score more than Iowa State does. I just think they're slightly more athletic on the interior.
And this is with Taman Lipsey really not playing very well in Maui so far. And so that's a really good sign. When both of those guards are rolling in Gilbert and Lipsey, man, things are going to be in good shape. And in the other game we didn't even talk about yet, Memphis, who's been really impressive so far, Leaf, beats Michigan State to advance to the championship, where we are guaranteed to see Tigers win the Maui championship. That said, here's Wednesday's schedule. It'll start with the 5th place game. Remember, the Maui order is always wacky. 5th place game, Iowa State, Colorado, 2:30 Eastern, ESPN2. Iowa State minus 13.5 at FanDuel. Then the championship game is actually 2nd, 5 Eastern. That's Auburn and Memphis on ESPN. Auburn minus 9.5. The 3rd place game is next, Michigan State, North Carolina, a rematch of last year's 2nd round NCAA tournament game. 9:30 Eastern, ESPN2. North Carolina right now by 4.5. And then the 7th place game, the one that I might be most intrigued by, UConn and Dayton, unfortunately doesn't tip off till like what's going to be technically Thanksgiving Day on the East Coast, ESPN2, UConn minus 6.5. Leaf, no real time for getting into those games, but there's the awareness of it. We talked about, obviously, North Carolina and Duke both lost, but there were a couple notable ACC wins yesterday. Clemson wins the Sunshine Slam, beating previously unbeaten Penn State 75-67. Ian Shefflin, a near triple-double, Leaf, 18 points, 13 boards, and 8 assists. Boston College wins the Cayman Islands Classic, beating Boise State 63-61, a great win for Boston College against a Boise State team that I like. And then another ACC result that you will be less happy about, Grand Canyon beating Stanford 78-71, although Maxime Reynaud continues to be absurd, averaging 23.7 points a game this year and 12.6 boards. This dude is bonkers, Leaf.
All-American
Maxime Reynaud. There you go.
I got a take for everyone here.
Okay.
Cooper Flagg's going to win the ACC Player of the Year, but if he doesn't, it's going to be Maxime Reynaud, not RJ Davis, not any of these other guys, but it's going to be Maxime Reynaud.
It should, man. It should absolutely be if the beginning of the season is any indication. All right, Leaf, going right now. The other big MTE kicks off today. Pat Kelsey's yelling at an official right now in real time. Battle for Atlantis. Indiana, 14th in the nation against Louisville right now. That score is Louisville 34, Indiana 27, 3:15 to go before the half. Louisville has looked like the better team the entire time. That's going on ESPN if you want to tune in. Coming up next will be third-ranked Gonzaga against West Virginia. We'll get to see Mr. DeVries against one of the best teams in the nation. 2:30 Eastern on ESPN. Zags minus 14.5. Then Oklahoma Providence at 5 on ESPN2. Oklahoma minus 2.5. Wrapping up the day will be 24th ranked Arizona against Davidson. 7:30 Eastern on ESPN2. Arizona minus 15.5. Leaf, I don't see a world in which Gonzaga doesn't win this event.
I agree. Before the season, I took them at plus 210. So I hope you're right.
Yes. And now what did we say they were in our FanDuel read? They're
minus 130. So that made
minus
me happy.
130. Yeah, that is great for you. And I think part of it, Leaf, is that Arizona, I don't think is as good as maybe as we thought they were going to be. At least they haven't shown it as of yet. Indiana, Louisville, I think this is going to be a little bit of a fight throughout this game, which is going to put Gonzaga in better shape tomorrow. I think they handle West Virginia pretty easily today.
I agree. I think Indiana is tremendously overrated because they've got all the talent in the world. They don't fit whatsoever. They have no shooting. That said, I thought they'd beat Louisville because Louisville's still meshing and they have all brand new players. At least Indiana, they have a few additions in Miles Rice, Umar Ballo, Kane and Carlisle. But they have their core of guys back last year, and Mbako and Renew and all these guys. But I just don't see the way they fit. I don't see the way they mesh. Unless Miles Rice is an All-American, I don't see how they win because they need a Jalen Hood-Schifino to make TJD win. So yep. I don't love it. I think Woodson recruited talent over fit, and I don't think it's working.
Yeah. Leaf, Feast Week is the absolute best. It's insane the amount of great basketball we get. It's so much fun. Going to be locked in all day again. I just saw a stat on screen. Louisville has made their last 8 field goals. That's crazy to me. So, folks, enjoy your Thanksgiving Eve. Thanks so much for tuning in with Leaf and I. This will be up on audio in just a few minutes for those of you who are not watching on YouTube. Hope that you have a great Thanksgiving. We will be back with the show tomorrow, even on Thanksgiving Day. So if you need to get away from your friends and family, I'll be right there with you in your ears. So get ready for that. If you have not subscribed to Locked On, sorry, my voice is like leaving me here as we leave the show. If you have not subscribed to Locked On College Basketball on YouTube and on audio, make sure you click in on that so that you don't miss a second of college basketball this season as we continue on with you 5 days a week and more coming on the weekends at times as well. If you haven't joined the Locked On College Basketball Discord, man, it's free to do so. The link for that is in the show notes. All right, folks, apologies to the lawyer family. As always, let's go Wildcats. And until tomorrow when we're going to eat all the turkey, peace.